Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sonya Matthews and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Women Living Well After 50, and I'm so happy that you've joined me. Now, during May, I'm putting the focus on mental health and well-being across all my media. That's the website, my podcasts, and the newsletters and my Facebook community. Now, we're going to be talking today with my guest, Sonya Matthews, who is a personal coach, and we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being, self-image, which is a huge issue for many women, having a purpose, and can we change our mindset? We're also going to be talking about the Love Being You project, which is something that Sonya is running at the moment. So to my guest, Sonya Matthews thrives on helping people get what they want. She does this by using thoughtful coaching skills and a natural problem-solving ability, as well as delivering education and insights to assist people towards their goals. Driven by wanting to leave the world a better place, Sonya infuses her approach with empathy and encouragement to enable people to feel good about themselves as they grow and develop. Sonya is committed to living her purpose of delivering mindset and performance coaching, and has a deep down conviction that one of the most powerful ways to help people is to share with them the mind-body connection and how to master it for health, happiness and success. A devoted and loving mother of 3 sons and happily married wife of 28 years, Sonya started her professional life as a mechanical engineer in the civilian army of the Australian Defence Organisation. Over the past 12 years, Sonya has developed expertise in online business and internet marketing, having run her boutique digital marketing agency now for almost 5 years. She enjoys long walks and has the Portuguese Camino and Japanese Nakasendo trail on her bucket list. So let's go and join the conversation. Well, I'm delighted to introduce my guest, Sonya Matthews, today, and it's lovely to finally meet you face-to-face, Sonya. So welcome.
Thank you, Sue. It's lovely to meet you face-to-face as well. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we've had a few conversations on Messenger and through the Facebook community, but it's really lovely. That's what I love about the podcast, because I get to actually chat with women who have messages that are going to help us all live well. So today, as you know, I've put the focus on our mental health and well-being during May. And I'd like to start by discussing how you personally managed and overcame your anxiety to the point where you could help others. I mean, there's a lot of challenges for women 50 plus, empty nesters, changing career, looming retirement, perhaps managing teenagers and the sandwich generation where we've got teenagers and aging parents. So you've got a personal story that you'd like to share. So I'd like to share that with us.
And I think I'd like to share it because I think so many people, or many people, will have come from a similar point. I guess I always say I've always been an anxious person. I grew up from a tiny tot being very anxious. I won't go into details except to say that, you know, when we have certain experiences when we're little, that becomes, because there's emotion attached to it, it becomes something that we grow into and we tend to hang on to if it's not dealt with or processed. And you know, that can have a very big effect on us in our lifetime, and all our experiences after they kind of build on it. So look, I was always cared for, loved. I mean, I'm not talking any horrendous childhood stories. And I think the important point about that is that we don't have to have trauma or a bad experience to grow up, find ourselves in our, you know, mid-ages with some kind of emotional like anxiety, or, you know, any of the other challenges, like even, you know, bursts of anger, that they come from, you know, emotions inside. And most of us aren't, we don't learn about that kind of thing at school. You know, we're not taught how to, you know, manage those things. And, you know, so I guess, you know, mine was really just, I mean, my parents divorced when I was very little, and in my environment, I had really good examples of how to be quite highly strung and, and, you know, anxious. But you've got to, you know, you've got to be a good little girl and keep that in. You know, you don't throw tantrums. So, you know, a very typical kind of thing, with a few other things. You know, I'm not laying blame, but just with a few other things that comes from being from a, you know, a separated family. And you know, so many people could probably relate to that kind of thing. And I guess for me, it got a little bit out of hand. I mean, I was lucky that I came from a loving family, and I have a wonderful, loving and supportive and tolerant husband. I'm just going to bat that mosquito. You know, so I've always been looked after. But it, unfortunately, when I started having my babies, that blossomed into postnatal depression, which isn't a lot of fun either. And there was care for that. But oh gosh, I realize now that, you know, there's so many other ways that we can care for ourselves. So really, you know, that was sort of my life up until my probably into my 30s and even early 40s. And the incredible thing about it was, just because of some typical background environmental things, it wasn't really until someone happened to mention to me to read this book by Louise Hay, and people may know of it. You Can Heal Your Life. That was probably the first time that, and also watching a presentation by my coach and the person who sort of said some words on stage at an event I was at, that made me realize, oh, I'm actually supposed to have emotions. It is okay to have feelings, because I was kind of brought up in a quite a Victorian way by an engineer dad who's very, you know, black and white, and fabulous teachings. But, you know, that emotional area was just effectively, you had to just, you know, brush yourself off and get up and keep going. Now, that tends to come out later and harm people, and, you know, it can come out in different ways. So, you know, that was sort of most of my life, and I was, you know, highly functioning, professional, you know, good, upstanding citizen. But, you know, obviously inside there were battles. So that was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I started to realize, oh, you know, we do have emotions. There's things we can do about it. We don't have to go to the doctor for drugs. We can do all these other things. So that's when I started reading and researching and watching and absorbing everything that I could. You know, and now, yes, it's effectively a story of having gone from being, you know, a little bit of a bundle of nerves and functional, but not a whole person, not a relaxed, calm person, to now, you know, 90% calm, happy, content, focused. I say 90% because I don't think that 100% happiness is logical. You know, life has its challenges. There's times to be sad, there's times to be angry. So, you know, and I have bad days, and I don't sort of put myself up here as an expert in mindset and having perfect mindset, because I've come to this through my experience, not through being an academic, and I guess that's where it's lovely to connect with people. So so there's a few things that I've done over that time, but that's sort of in a nutshell the background.
And I think that it's important to remember that, you know, we are individuals, and you know, we all react in different ways. I know that, yes, I used to be like you, quite anxious, and when I was growing up, very self-conscious. And I'm not really sure where it came from, but, you know, like you, I had a loving family. But the other point that you raised, which I do like to stress as well, is that life isn't 100% perfect. And I think that we need to accept that. And, you're going to have times when you aren't happy, and there's nothing wrong with that, because that is life. We have a range of emotions. And so I talked about happiness triggers in my Micro Mondays podcast this week. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be happy all the time, but if you are feeling low, sometimes those happiness triggers, just thinking about those or doing those things that can make you feel a little better or, lift your mood, can help. So I like that point where you did say that life isn't 100% happy, because it certainly isn't.
We wouldn't know happiness if we didn't know sorrow, would we?
No, perfect. Yeah, that is exactly right. That is exactly right. So I'd like to move on to another point, which is an issue for many women. It's self-image. And that's one that certainly can lead to anxiety and low self-esteem. And again, I put my hand up, been there, and it's really taken me until probably 60 to come to terms with the person that I am, and to actually love the person that I am and not be so self-conscious. So what do you suggest to your clients to overcome that negative self-talk? I call it the mean girl in our head that is always putting ourselves down. We're good at lifting up others, but we're equally good at putting ourselves down. So what's your advice?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And self-image, about who we are, but how we look as well. It's such a big thing. And it's an area of interest for me for various reasons. And some of the statistics say that, most women have some aspect of that, with their appearance or how they feel about themselves. Yeah. It's so big. There's a lot of different things involved. And once again, a lot of this is based on our early experiences. We get this, we start off very, little babies love themselves. they think they know they're beautiful. And then as we start to interact and, our surroundings start to mold us, we develop this personality between who we really are and what we show to the outside world. So we can be so hard on ourselves because that's what we're kind of reflecting. So, look, there's so many areas here, but I tried to, wanted to try to think of about a couple. I've got 3 tips that are the first things that come to mind for me. And when we say self-image, I'm going to talk sort of to how we feel about ourselves, more so than, because there's sort of another set when it comes to, what we think about how we look. They're related, but so probably the first thing that comes to mind when I think of self-image and how we speak to ourselves inside that inner critic voice, that mean girl. Maybe I could sort of take you through a scenario and people could sort of pretend, imagine this. So if you take a moment, maybe even close your eyes if you're able to, and take a deep breath or two, just to be have a slightly calmer mind and be able to think clearly and block other things out. And picture yourself as a little girl, somewhere around the age of about 4 or 5. And at that stage, were you innocent? Were you beautiful? Were you deserving? Did you want to be loved? Were you worthy of love and respect and adoration and care? I suggest you were, and you would have thought that you were. You would have known that you were. Now, if you were standing now imagine yourself, the adult you, standing in front of the 5-year-old you, just in your mind's eye, imagine that little girl. Would you hug her? Would you let her know that she matters and she's important and she's beautiful and lovable just as she is? And I think you would find it very easy to imagine that. And that little girl is still within us. She hasn't gone away. She's still there. So then take the next step to consider if there was, a little girl standing in front of you, someone else, you wouldn't speak to her horribly. So why do we speak to ourselves horribly?
Yeah, that's
so
something That's something I think all the time. You know,
Yeah.
we're so careful with everyone else, and yet with ourselves, we really don't look at ourselves as our own friend. And I've often said we should be our own best friend. But
Yes,
yeah.
that's a beautiful way to say it. And so Louise Hay, the lady I mentioned, the book, for those who haven't heard of her, she does a lot of, they call it inner child work. So it's just a really interesting area. So, you know, that's sort of my tip number one to go. If you're being really hard on yourself, would you really do that to a little girl? And she's still there. The second tip is something I really love to overcome that negative self-talk. And to be aware that it's going on in our brain. It does come down to mindfulness and being aware of, you know, what we're thinking, and noticing what's going on for us at any given time. And this is where I'm actually a really big proponent of, I'll call it meditation, because that's how people know about it. So spending time where the brain, our mind can calm and relax. That gives us a lot of power. That's a whole topic on its own, obviously, but being able to calm our mind and notice what's going on in our mind is really powerful, because then we'll be able to notice those thoughts. We become conscious of our thoughts. And when the nasty ones come up, we can go, oh, that's interesting. Is that true? So there's actually another fellow that I've done a lot of studying on. His name's John Kehoe. He's a Canadian. It's Kehoe. He's not really, really big in the marketing of his material, I don't think, but you'd certainly find him. But he has this wonderful saying about weeding out the negatives. So, you know, if you imagine a beautiful garden with all the flowers and the plants, if the weeds are allowed to get in there and take over, it's not really a healthy garden. Well, our thoughts, the negative or the harmful, maybe not so much positive, negative, you know, starts to get into that black and white, but the harmful kinds of thoughts that aren't helping our feelings and how we're going, they can do the same if we don't notice them and go, do I really need, you know, is that true? What am I going to do about that? So he talks about weeding out the negatives, and I just think that's very, very cool. But it starts with being aware of them. So having that mind where we notice that. So mindfulness. So yeah, weeding them out. And as I said, you know, not trying to be positive all the time, but just be aware of what's harmful, what's realistic, and what's not. So my third tip, and I've got a bonus tip. My third tip was, I hadn't come across this until I learned it from someone else recently, but we can journal some acknowledgements of ourselves. So write down some acknowledgements about ourselves. So these can be anything positive or uplifting, or things that we've achieved that we have enjoyed about ourselves. So it can be things like, you know, I'm kind to animals. I make wonderful cups of tea for my friend. I completed a certificate or a degree in this qualification. You know, I'm good at fundraising, and just come up with a list of, you know, 10, 20, 50, just, you know, all the things over our life, to look at all the wonderful aspects about ourselves. And it might even be things like, you know, I've got really strong legs that help me walk a long distance, and I've got great hair, or people say my eyes are lovely. You know, it can be physical things as well. I give great hugs. Just, you know, just everything and anything. You can imagine coming up with hundreds, really, or, you know, there's an exercise. We could be able to come up with hundreds. So it's just another little exercise to focus on our lovely stuff, you know, and to lift us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I've often said something similar, because we, you know, like someone will give you a compliment and you'll just dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah.
Now, most of the time, I'm sure people are very genuine in their compliments. So, you know, you have to start believing that. And I think a good way is through that exercise you've just mentioned, where you actually have to sit down, take the time to write some positive things about yourself. And it could be just something like, I make a great cup of coffee. In my case, that is not true. And I and I have had my husband, when we first got together, I was making him coffee and he said, darling, you've got many talents, but coffee making isn't one of them. So I'll make it in future. So there you go. Who won in that situation? And I also had another friend when I was working, if we'd had business guests and I'd say, I'll make a coffee, she'd say, no, I'll make it because it's shocking. So, that's not a good one, but it could be, it's something that we don't do often enough. And that is write down our achievements and not be afraid to shout those to the world, to say, I am this or I am that, and I'm proud of it. And I think that's another thing that goes back to another topic altogether, the limiting beliefs that we've learned as children or growing up, where don't put yourself out front and center, don't pat yourself on the back, don't be proud of yourself. That's being vain, or it's being this or that. So that exercise of yours is, I think, going to be a Micro Mondays little segment too.
It's a lovely idea, because we can so quickly come up with our negatives.
Exactly.
Read over a list like that every day. Imagine how we would feel.
Yeah.
And one last little tip, can I say? And this is one I've always been, I've my mentors have picked me up on, is it's never say out loud anything negative about ourselves, like even in jest, like, oh, I'm an idiot. I find that so hard, because actually I find it hysterical to have a laugh at myself and call myself a nong or whatever, but our mind is listening only the positives.
So I'm guilty. I'm guilty of all these things, but that makes me human, and hopefully that makes me relatable. That's true too, and that's probably one of the most difficult things to do, is because I'll do it in jest, obviously, and it's really putting yourself down when you don't mean to, but after a while, your mind starts to think, maybe there's some truth in that.
When so there's someone else say it as well, it really stands out.
Yes.
So you think, are they really think? And I think they do really think that sometimes. If you know the person. So anyway,
So great tips there. Now I want to move on to purpose. That we hear a lot of talk about that. I've had podcast episodes on it, and it's in all my media. I write about it. But in your mind, how does having a purpose relate to good mental well-being?
Well, this is, I really love this question, because it's something that has been very big for me in, sort of my transformation from where I was, because it's something that I experienced. I think there's a couple of fundamental qualities about ourselves that are really useful to consider when we look at what our purpose is. The two areas are, one is our values, and the other is our personality type, and a combination of those makes us very unique, obviously, makes us unique. But firstly, looking at our values, because I think our purpose follows our values. If we know our values, our purpose sort of becomes clearer. And by values, I don't mean, be punctual, don't swear, don't litter kind of thing. Obviously, those things are good and important as well. But I mean values as to what's important to us. What do we value? What makes our hearts sing? What do we spend our time doing? What do we surround ourselves with? What do we never let drop, if, even in crisis kind of thing? What's important to us? And what are our values, not other people's values that might have been imposed on us? So we'll get to that in a second. So, some examples might be family, and that's my number one value. My boys, my husband, my mum, just if doesn't matter what happens, I'll drop everything else if my boys need me, kind of thing. Don't necessarily tell them that. They'll have me wrapped around their little finger. Exercise, business, money, fitness, things like that. There's different values that people might have, or their art, or their music. So we're all different. And we can actually go through an exercise and find out, really sort of drill down and work out what are our top 3 to 5 values. And what we find is that if we're not living in alignment with our own values, if we're not actually able to, demonstrate them and live with them, then we can be very frustrated and dissatisfied. So, for example, an example of that might be, say, or two sort of little examples. Say we have to work 70 hours a week and we're really, really busy, on our job, but family is our number one value. We're going to be torn because, yes, we're providing, but we're not getting the time with our families. So we're going to have an internal battle in that respect. Another way that this sort of thing might happen is that, say a family, a child or a young person has been guided into a certain area of study by their parent. Maybe a doctor wanted the child to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or in my case, an engineer. I was guided that way, and I just went and did it because it was, put forward as good. And again, no blame. It's just how it was. It was done in the best of intent, and I didn't, do anything against it. But then you find yourself down the track and you're doing something that, mine's sort of got a bit of a hysterical story about it, but I won't go into that right now. But so, our values need to be our own values, not someone else's, because we can end up dissatisfied and frustrated. And that's obviously going to be affecting our mental health, our well-being. And a second factor that comes into it as well is our personality. We've all got different personality types. Some people are the extroverted go-getters and, extroverted entrepreneurs. Others are more introverted and carers and nurturers. You get the very analytical, accountants and engineers. And, all of those different personality factors come together. And if you layer that, on top of, our values as well, you get what's, quite a unique person, obviously our unique person. As I said, I started life as an engineer, and it's quite funny because now I realise my personality type, after having gone through this exercise recently, or in the last, half dozen years, having realised my personality type and my values, it's quite funny because I started off life working in the Defence Department, working on projects that were, guided bombs to drop from aircraft and laser guided missiles. What was I doing there? And, the projects just leave me cold. I never had a job I liked, but I love the people. So lately I've gone, any wonder, and that's why, I've sort of gone the direction I have. So you can sort of see by that example. So I think by knowing ourselves very well, understanding our personality types, understanding our values, we can then sort of start to put that together and work out, are we living in alignment with our values? And if we're not, maybe that's the source of, dissatisfaction, frustration, stress. We can't necessarily, chuck out what we're doing and go and, I don't know, like my husband would like to do surf because no one will pay him to surf, but if we can sort of recognize what's going on and realize, there may be a thread between what we'd really like to be doing and what we have to do for the time being, we can often rationalize it ourselves quite well. So that's how I think values relate, or purpose. Values and personality kind of lead to our purpose. And that's how that relates to mental health. So if we haven't got that right, we're probably a bit dissatisfied and, not fully fulfilled.
That's great. Okay, so can we change our mindset? Do you have any ideas that you can suggest to help us if we're in a bit of a negative mindset to try and look at things or change it? Is it possible to change the way we think?
Yeah, there's so much on that as well. And I think once again, it's like starting with the awareness, understanding that there's different ways that things can be. Something I found really interesting was learning about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, where, a fixed mindset is where, we might say someone's set in their ways. And certainly, by the time we've got a few years under our belt and we're getting quite mature and we've had experiences and we start finding ourselves, the years are flying, there's certain patterns. That is actually, this is an area that's so fascinating, neuroplasticity, which comes into so many of these things we're talking about, and is I'll call it a fairly new area, because years ago, or when I was a child, about that kind of time, the thought was that you couldn't change the way your brain worked. Whereas now, scientists are finding out that we can rewire our brain. I believe they say you can't completely get rid of old neural connections. So if you've had a bad habit or if you've had a bad experience, an element of it still stays there, but we can start to diminish that, and we can start to develop stronger new neural connections, which is new ways of thinking, new habits and things like that. It's so exciting, and it comes into this. So a fixed mindset is where we might say, someone's stuck in their ways. It's been like that. It's always going to be like that. Someone treated me badly in the past. I'm always going to be treated badly like that in the future. We won't change our ways. That's how we do it. And in fact, what's really interesting that's coming out is that being able to develop our mind and continue to create new neural pathways is incredibly important for healthy aging, and to do with our mental strength around, when we start talking about Alzheimer's and things like that, they're starting to sort of look into those kind of areas. So having new experiences, doing different things, doing things a different way as we age is really important, which I find tricky because I like doing my things my way. So I got to get out there. So if you can sort of see, that's a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, where we're able to see things in a different way. We're open to new ideas. We can go, oh, that's a bit of a fixed thought. Maybe I'll look at it in a different perspective. Because also try, if we've got a fixed mindset and the environment is changing, it can tend to also suggest that we might be trying to control that environment. And of course we can't. And that causes stress and maybe anger, So probably being able to be aware of fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and having the idea that, we can be open-minded and seeing things differently. And maybe a really nice example that I think of at the moment that will sort of clarify it for people too, is my husband and I have an 18-year-old son. And because we just talked about personality and things like that, my husband and I are actually of about a very similar personality. And our 18-year-old son has a personality that really is almost, I'll say, poles apart, just a completely different type. We're more the introverts, quieter in a particular way. He's much more got to be out there. And when you compare what he does at 18 with what we did, what we thought was right, it's different. And, can you imagine parenting that if we were going, no, it's got to be like this? And he's very determined, young man. He's a great guy. I'm not painting him out to be bad, but when you look at young people today, as opposed to when we were kids, it wasn't like that. Fortunately, several years ago, we came across this, and as he grew from being a guidable young boy into starting to bloom, instead of going, right, this isn't going to happen, I've been able to sort of stand back and go, okay, it's different. Is it wrong? I'm not a boy. I'm not 18 years old now. The world is different. How can I look at this? So, by approaching this particular situation that way, it's possible to sort of maintain a relationship and communication. And then when you do have to step in and say, no, that's not on, we don't do that as adults, you're picking your battles rather than having a relationship fall down because you can't stand the way he keeps his room, for example.
I like that.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I like that point about it's different, but is it wrong? And that could be with anyone in life. And there's a lot of people, I would say I used to be a little bit black and white myself, but as you get older, you realise there's grey areas, but also it's the way you look at other people and what they do. And that's right. Just because you don't think that way doesn't necessarily mean that what they think is wrong. So that's an excellent point. Now, we've got so many topics. I'm going to have you back on the show because I want to talk more about the growth mindset. Each question we could have had a whole episode on. So I'll be booking you to visit again. But I do want to talk to you about the Love Being You project that you've got going. If you
Yeah.
could tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, yeah, that's the name I've settled on for, it's taken me a few iterations to sort of over the last couple of years to kind of work out what is it that really resonates with people and with what I can offer. And what I do is I love to help women get what they want and on the way overcome stress and frustration and dissatisfaction. But most importantly, or just as importantly, to help them to love who they are. And because, from my research and observations and experience, I've sort of come to know that when we start from accepting ourselves, appreciating ourselves, liking and ideally loving who we are, we experience greater happiness and success and calm and, fulfillment in our lives. But we can then also see that in others, and we can be more open-minded to what other people are going through. So, greater emotional intelligence, so to speak. So I think too that the bottom line for me is that seeing a world where women are empowered, living by their values as much as possible, fulfilled and feel whole and healthy and able to give their good. I think that's a really beautiful and healthy world to be in. So everything I do with my messages and my teaching and my guidance is towards that, focusing on helping women reach their goals, which can be personal, or it can be achieve a business success, or it's any kind of success, because it all comes back down to our inner thinking and emotions and experiences and how we work through challenges. And so I suppose I do that by it's mindset and it's mindfulness, but it's also it all relates into overcoming unhelpful habits or harmful habits, like drinking too much alcohol or smoking or overeating, because they're all related into our emotions, our thinking, and going back to those basics. So and a really exciting project I'm working on at the moment is loving how we look, because that self-esteem connection, and that's a lot of fun. So yeah, so that's really what my goal is with the Love Being You project.
Well, that sounds great, and I'd love to be involved somehow, because we do think alike with that. And also I'll be putting in the show notes all the links for people to connect with you and to learn more about that project and the other work that you do. Yeah. So that brings me to my last question, which I ask all of my guests, and that is, what does being a woman living well mean to you?
Well, I obviously think it's to do with having that healthy mindset and being in alignment with our own values, not someone else's. So, just because, so that starts with knowing ourselves well. And so just because there's kind of a thought that, people get to a certain age and then they retire and then they don't do anything different, I just don't believe in that. I just think 50 years, halfway, we can, with our knowledge about health, and let's aim for, for 100. And if we want to do something different, we can. So it's about, our mind, as well as a, good physical health, obviously good nutrition and good exercise that's appropriate and everything. But I think that, it's definitely having that view that it's still all out there for us. And yes, we may have things we have to take into consideration if things don't work quite as fast as they used to or whatever, but, we can, with a growth mindset, with that feedback, we can look at all sorts of different things. And that goes for, now that things can be done online, women have, of a mature age, have so much experience, so much guidance, so much care for each other, so much support. There's a lot of things we can do online now, whether it's for, making an income or just to connect. So there's a real community there. And, I guess a mantra that I've always had, that I bring up all the time, is just because we've always known something to be in a particular way, just because something's always been like that in history, doesn't mean it's right. If we look at women having to give up work when they got married, or women not being able to vote, or public hangings, or things were like they were in the past. Things don't have to stay like that. So we can question, challenge the status quo. I think we can do whatever we would like to, and let's not just think we're hanging up our work belt and then sitting and being bored. So yeah, all of that.
Well,
but I'm not really going to go jumping out of a plane. I'm not going to be an 80-year-old granny jumping out of a plane parachuting.
No, neither that or bungee jumping. So I have
there is no need for that.
No, that's right. But look, I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you today, Sonya, and I'm serious. I'm having you back for another conversation because I just feel
I can talk forever.
Yeah, I just feel motivated and inspired after listening to you, and that's what I want this program to be about: sharing women's ideas and inspiring each other and supporting each other, empowering each other to live our best life. And I've thoroughly enjoyed today. So thank you for joining me.
I love being on. It's been fun. I really have enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's great. And for those of you who've been listening or watching, thank you for joining us today. If you've liked the program and what you've heard, please give us a like or subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You might like to also share the podcast or the recording with a friend who may also benefit from it. And in the meantime, remember to live well and enjoy life. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.